Assalamu alaikum, b'nei Khabiwe, ubasima raba b'sharaktochon ammi gudaha video. Shimi ile Lolita Emmanuel. Iwan pianist atureta ubaqrayan doctora yen PhD gu musika klassiketa atureta gu betsobet Sydney, Australia. Idiom betalen katochon ubetamzimen amochon. Biayuan at hawili shkalia walta yen conversation amochon but dartet yen future et musika klassiketa atureta. Ina katunti yen igarti yen message di katochon hamzamti bitoya bilishana inglesaya. I'm a performer researcher, which means that I use music as a tool to understand myself and the world around me. My doctorate research is about Assyrian art music, which is a small but growing genre that blends Assyrian music with Western classical and Middle Eastern composition techniques. And it's a genre that I've been interested in for a while, mainly because of my own experiences as an Assyrian pianist. I grew up in diaspora, moving through many musical worlds at once. At home and with my family, I heard Assyrian and Armenian music. With my community, I danced to Assyrian rhythms like Khigga and Sheikhani. But at school and in my music lessons, I was taught to play the music of European composers from the Western art tradition, like Bach, Beethoven, Mozart and Chopin. Assyrian music, or even Assyrian piano music, never appeared in my formal education. Now, the obvious reason for this is that music education in Western countries is pretty behind on its cultural diversity. But the second and bigger reason is because, as a stateless and persecuted transnational community, Assyrians have less access to the opportunities that nation states do to promote and invest in our music on an international level. But over the past few years, our community has seen a new burst of creativity in the arts, and specifically, a renewed interest in cultivating Assyrian art music. My doctorate degree focuses on just that, and is one step toward understanding what it means to connect to my Assyrian identity through music, or what I call performing Assyrianness. One way that I do that is through concerts just like this, where I take what I've learnt about Assyrian music from history books, academics and artists, and experiment with that new knowledge in creative ways. And even though I'm on this journey thousands of kilometres away from the Assyrian homeland, it's a kind of creativity that our community has shown time and time again. Wherever we've migrated, Assyrians have been able to pick up the materials around them, whether they're bricks, food, or musical instruments, and create home. This creativity is what I call resilience. Despite ongoing oppression and erasure, we persevere by inventing new ways of practicing and sustaining our culture. And the exciting part about my research is that I get to share it with my community, like I am right now. And it's through this that I hope to learn from you. When I ask what the future of Assyrian art music is, the answer will be guided by you, my Assyrian community. So today isn't just a concert, it's a conversation, and I invite my fellow Assyrians to share your views and perspectives in the comment section attached to this video. And if you're not Assyrian, Pshena, welcome, and thank you for joining me. I hope you all enjoyed this lecture recital. I began this recital with a piece called At the Palace of Ashurbanipal, who was the king of the Assyrian Empire before it eventually fell in 612 BC. The music was written in 2016 by a Russian composer called Ilya Demutsky. Yelena Akopova, who was an Assyrian pianist, commissioned it and asked Demutsky to write the piece for an exhibition she performed in at the University of California, Berkeley. The event was called Pop-Up Palmyra, Art in Response to the Destruction of the Past, and was organized after the recent destruction of ancient artifacts in Southwest Asia by ISIS. And you also would have seen a film during my performance of this work. I commissioned it from my Assyrian friend and visual artist Diki Bato, who's based in the US and regularly works with photography, moving images and performance. I am so excited to collaborate with Diki because through art and music, we get to exchange ideas about Assyrianness and learn about our shared heritage. Shalom Aloch, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Yeah, good. It's good to see you. How you been?
I've been great. A busy start to my semester, but good, going well.
So we are, basically done with filming the recital, but I just wanted to talk to you about your work. First of all, your work in general, but specifically the one that you did for at the Palace of Ashurbanipal. Tell me about your thinking behind that film, because when I saw the ISIS footage in the film, it was so emotional for me.
Yeah, I think it came out of working on this other self-portrait that I made, which is used in the film, the one that's based on the statue they have at the Louvre.
Yeah.
So I had gone to Paris for the first time and went to the Louvre, and I saw that statue, and I thought, and it had actually been quite a long time since I had seen any Assyrian statues in person.
Yeah.
I grew up in New Jersey and used to go to the Metropolitan Museum a lot. So I would see the Lamassu and the things that they had there when I was a child. But I hadn't seen any since then, basically, since I was like 12 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I saw it, and I had just recently I had been adopted by a cat. And so when I saw it, I kind of jokingly was like, oh, it's like me and Katyush. I think I had mentioned growing up, I didn't grow up in a Syrian community, really. I didn't know a lot of people who were Syrian except for my family. And for most of my, growing up and most of my life, the strongest connection that I had, or any sense of connection that I had to Assyrian culture, was through these ancient statues.
Symbols. Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so I saw the ISIS videos, and it was very difficult emotionally to see that, because it was, I knew what had happened to my family. My family comes from Diyarbakir in what is now Turkey, and I knew that they had been forced to leave their homes during the genocide, and that my great-grandfather was killed along with his brothers, and my great-grandmother, and walked with all of her children, including my grandfather, who was just a baby at the time, and they walked from Diyarbakir to Aleppo, where they then lived for 15 or so years before they left to come to the United States.
Yeah.
But that's sort of that was all I knew. And so I was watching these videos and thinking oh, so I have so little connection to my own family's history, and that's a consequence of what happened to my family, right?
Yeah,
so
genocide,
it was
colonization.
Genocide. They were forced to leave their homes. They were forced to leave their community.
Yeah.
And I saw these videos and saw what ISIS was doing, and recognized in it that they were trying to do the same thing for more people, for people who hadn't left when my family had left. And not only forcing them out of their homes, but severing the connection that, I had to my own history, the only connection that I had, trying to erase that. Since I had seen myself reflected in this statue, I just thought, I'll literally put myself into the statue. So, you know, in the film, you see these pieces where I'm kind of like pushing together photographs that are of myself and of the statue.
That's so amazing. Like, and I was just thinking, like, going back to, you know, the fact that ISIS was destroying these artifacts, these important symbols that are important to us as Assyrians, and even the local communities in Iraq as well, like the Yazidis as well. And it's just like, you're right, like these symbols are so important to us because it kind of makes up our cultural memory. Like these are the symbols that we rely on to maintain a sense of belonging, or like look at this and be like, this is part of our history. Like this is something that, like, that's me. You know, sometimes people see themselves reflected in these things. With the films and what you've done with that footage, being able to see our symbols and our ancient images in that, like what's so great about it is that, you know, even though we can't visit those ancient sites today, like for whatever reason, like they might be destroyed, they might be in a faraway country that we can't get access to, or they might be hidden behind the glass walls of a museum that you have to pay $40 to access to see. It's things like art, like your film, and music and performance that allows us to revisit those sites and kind of reimagine them in a meaningful way. And I think that's what I loved so much about what you did in that film. I'm so honored to be able to have it as part of my performance. So thank you so much.
Well, yeah. I mean, thank you for asking me, you know, to be involved. So.
What you are doing is, to me, the most Assyrian thing ever, because, you know, since like historically in our community, Assyrians haven't had the opportunity or like the platform to represent themselves and to kind of, you know, seek justice, like in social context or economic or political context, like back in the homeland. They didn't have that. But what they did was they turned to music and culture to do that, to connect with others, to represent themselves. And it's just like, you know, we are still doing this today after so many generations. And so, yeah, to me, it's the most Assyrian thing ever. Khayat, good job. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Basima. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Music plays a huge role in providing a sense of home for my community, especially at our weddings and ritualistic events, where we sing and dance to the sounds and rhythms that remind us of our homeland. But finding a sense of home on the acoustic piano is a lot harder, and it presents a tricky challenge for Assyrian musicians. It's an equally tempered instrument, meaning that each key is divided into sounds that exclude ruba, or quarter tones, which are the notes that we often play and hear in traditional Assyrian music. And if you're playing without an Assyrian singer who sings in our language, expressing Assyrianness on the acoustic piano alone is a bit awkward. Of course, we've managed to find our ways around this. Musicians often use electric keyboards where notes can be manipulated to create sounds that are familiar to Assyrians. Other times, we just play the acoustic piano anyway. But because of this challenge, there's only a small collection of Assyrian music for solo piano. Some composed by Assyrian composers, but the rest written by non-Assyrians. And it's those compositions that have pushed me to ask bigger questions about this small but growing genre. What role do I play as a classical pianist with Assyrian heritage? In our training, classical pianists have been taught to perform and communicate the music written by composers. What does this mean when most Assyrian music for my instrument has been written by non-Assyrians? And what is the way forward for creating new Assyrian art music that celebrates our rich history and is exciting for our community? Well, a good place to start is to look at what Assyrians and communities like us already do with music. Many music scholars talk about how communities experiencing oppression use music to make their voices heard, to answer back to injustice, and to experience positive social change. When Assyrians were suppressed or ignored, music was the only alternative for recognition. In the early 20th century, and not long after Sefer, the 1915 Assyrian genocide, an Assyrian from Iran named William Daniel began composing a musical genre that he hoped would communicate, protect, and promote Assyrians and their heritage while they were under threat. He blended Assyrian music with Middle Eastern composition techniques, as well as the approaches of 19th century European classical composers who developed this style called musical nationalism. This style basically involved taking what composers thought were the pure or essential musical ingredients of an indigenous culture and integrating them into a Western classical style that would represent the identity of a nation. At a time when empires around the world were reinventing themselves as nation states and used music as part of this process, this style inspired William Daniel and many Assyrian composers that came after him, like Polis Khofri, Nebu Isabi, and Alexander Shura Michalian. But musical nationalism has a complicated history, mostly due to its roots in Western elitist attitudes and condescending beliefs about indigenous cultures. These beliefs tend to view indigenous music as primitive or unintelligent until it's elevated into a more sophisticated European form. Still, this was a really exciting approach at the time and was a way for William Daniel to experiment with Assyrian music. He believed that by searching for the purest Assyrian music, which he thought belonged to the Assyrian mountaineers of Hakkari, that he could preserve and represent the Assyrian nation in its best form. But not all Assyrians originate from Hakkari or call it home. In fact, home can mean, sound, and feel like different things to many Assyrians, like Western Assyrians, who produced musical pioneers like Gabriel Assad and Nuri Iskander. For Suryoye, home can sound and feel quite different to Hakkari. That's why some people feel that 20th century Assyrian nationalist compositions lack Assyrian roots. These varying perspectives of our music makes me wonder, can musical nationalism, a genre based on the concept of a homogeneous nation, speak for a diverse transnational community? Maybe this was a way of performing Assyrianness that was relevant to William Daniel back then, especially after the genocide. But it's just the beginning for transnational Assyrians today, whose diverse culture and musical expressions can't be easily boiled down into a set of clear musical ingredients. So I propose we think about this genre differently. Instead of the musical nationalism approach, which represents indigenous music as almost extinct and in need of Western or European improvement, what if we search for an alternative that reflects our diverse community and celebrates our creativity? This is what Assyrian scholars talk about, like the historian Sargon Donabed. He says, too often we only hear about what has been done to Assyrians, and rarely do we hear about what has been done by them, what Assyrians have achieved, even during hardship. This approach to Assyrian art music is less about claiming the most accurate or pure version of Assyrian culture and more about what unites us, our resilience. It's a positive attitude that opens the door to creativity and lets us experiment with different sounds and instruments that resonate with Assyrians around the world. And if we think of the bigger picture for a moment, it's an approach that can continue the long-standing Assyrian tradition of using music as a tool for empowerment. It's a platform to represent ourselves and to respond to the stories that are told about us, especially as we've been denied a say about what gets written about us in the history books. Each performance in my concert today tells a different story about Assyrians and their resilience. It includes music written by both non-Assyrian and Assyrian composers, combined with Dickey's art installations to bring these stories about resilience to life. Together, we draw on our past to understand ourselves today and to imagine life in the future. It speaks to what Sargon Donabed says about Assyrians and our artists today.
أطرايع يدقيت كي طايب أمي قوتا يتشقيتي أتقتا ودعور خيقة ديي هك مجاهي قد مغزي تميهوتا المبريلة أو خشب قائم الخراوة دعور أو خبت خزون عويرة خينك بشمي القائم وخشويت إيلخة بصلة اتنقمتا دبريتا كرمة البود بوذ الدعور إن عمج غشيت قليمة كنشتي كل نيتا كي تمامي البسعثة لقامة قواشة من سرغن دونابيت.
The second piece in my program today, titled Assyrian Women Mourners, was written in collaboration between a Greek-Armenian spiritual figure and mystic called George Gurdjieff and the Russian pianist Thomas de Hartmann. The piece was written to accompany a spiritual dance practice developed by Gurdjieff that was mainly aimed at his followers in Western countries. Most people believe Gurdjieff collected this music during his extensive travels in Southwest Asia, where he met with different communities, including Assyrians. But many researchers today say that it's unlikely that this music is based on actual Assyrian songs, and it's more likely written through stereotypical ideas of what Middle Eastern music sounds like. Either way, the music and its choreographed dance have become quite popular around the world, and by giving it an Assyrian title, it paints a picture to its listeners about Assyrians and our culture. This can be one of the challenges we face as a community when non-Assyrians enter the classical music world and speak for us. Some people believe that Assyrian Women Mourners, the piano piece, is based on an ancient Assyrian mourning tradition, which Assyrians might know as the Jinanyata tradition, where certain women are chosen to attend a funeral and sing improvised, rhymed lamentations about the deceased to help the family grieve. While the origins of this music are not exactly known, my performance tells a story about mourning and dealing with trauma. The Assyrian scholar Noris Attu describes how poetry and song became powerful vessels for Assyrians. They helped channel their trauma and grief about genocides and oppression, especially after being discouraged from seeking justice and protesting the 1915 genocide. Due to fears of repercussions from the Turkish state, Assyrians had no choice but to grieve privately through song. Music was used more and more as an emotional outlet for the families of genocide victims, and gradually, songs turned into evidence, where elders passed down eyewitness accounts about the genocide to younger generations. These songs eventually formed a new genre in diaspora, where younger generations shared those eyewitness accounts on stage and in recordings that circulated Assyrian communities. Songs were performed in a lamenting style, and the lyrics featured themes and metaphors of trauma, as well as actual historical information about the genocide events. Over time, the style shifted, and from the 1980s, Assyrians began telling more hopeful, positive stories about perseverance and resistance, refusing to let their experiences with oppression define them.
You didn't walk the death marches, but your soul was here among us. You will carry the memories of our nation with you when you are born in the future. You will have the memories of the ragged people we became. You will know our pain. You will see our eyes. They stifled our cries, but you will hear us. Be our voice. Tell our tale. Tell our tale. Tell our tale.
What's incredibly creative here is the use of performance as a tool to transform traumatic experiences into powerful protest songs on stage. Creativity and resilience come together in this process as we tell our stories and truths. And in the modern compositions of Assyrian composers, we continue this tradition.
Well, first of all, the music is taken from our folk melodies. The whole purpose was, or is, to put it in a form, in an art form, which is classical music. And our young generation have changed a lot so far. They have been exposed to a lot of different kind of music, and basically all the music that they have been introduced to were not our own. So I wanted to make this our own music that is in art form, so they can participate.
This is Rabbi Rasun Bet Yonan, who is the Assyrian composer behind the final piece of my program, Gudi, which is the second movement from a larger composition called Theme and Variations in 4 movements. Each movement draws on an Assyrian folk melody to tell a story about the historical experience of Assyrians, from ancient times to the present day. The music draws on a structure from European classical music called theme and variations, a type of composition based on the repetition of a main melody or theme, usually heard at the start of a piece and then heard repeatedly in different variations throughout. Usually, the melody is varied by using different rhythms, harmonies, and even making small changes to the original melody. Some music scholars say that the theme and variations structure is a musical way of saying the same thing but differently each time we repeat it. But when Rabbi Rasun uses the theme and variation structure, he's not just repeating the melody over and over again. He reinvents traditional Assyrian music in a way that allows young Assyrian classical performers like me to rediscover and connect with our history and traditions in diaspora. In this movement, the theme is the melody of Gudi, a traditional song historically sung when churning butter from a gouda, a churn made from goat skin leather. It's a resourceful use of the goat. The remaining meat is later consumed, while its skin becomes a vessel. Across various historic homelands, but mainly in mountainous areas, Assyrians were skilled agriculturalists and relied on breeding and caring for cattle for their livelihood. Through this, they formed long-term bonds with their animals, bonds that are actually expressed and feature heavily in our cultural practices. Assyrian women take the lead in this practice and stand at opposite ends of the churn, slowly rocking the gudi back and forth against their leg until they build momentum. To pass time, they sing. Just like our ancestors, who reassembled and repurposed the goat into a butter churn, Rabbi Rasun's composition reinvents gudi through a variety of creative techniques. And the result is something powerful. He's basically repurposed classical music to transmit our culture to newer generations. In the spirit of gudi, my performance features a film that tells this story about creativity through resourcefulness. It shows Esther Elia, another Assyrian artist based in the US, who is continuing this same artistic tradition of Assyrian resilience through her reinvention of ancient Assyrian incantation bowls. She uses art and these bowls not only to reconnect with her heritage, but also as a form of cultural resilience. And she does this by recording both old and new Assyrian stories, prayers and oral traditions directly onto the bowls. Like Rabbi Rasun's gudi, Esther creatively combines art with ancient traditions to maintain our cultural practices and to communicate Assyrian stories. If you're still with me, thank you for watching. We've reached the end of this lecture recital. I hope you've enjoyed these performances, as well as the ideas that I've shared with you. This project is about understanding Assyrian art music and what it could be in the future. Through hundreds of years of displacement and persecution, music has been a powerful tool for our community to be resilient, to represent ourselves, and to celebrate our rich history and traditions. No matter where we've migrated, Assyrians continue to use music to create home. While the genre of Assyrian art music is still growing, it too could be part of this tradition of resilience and musical homemaking. But there are many ways to go about this. I've explored just one approach today, but I'd like to hear from you, my Assyrian community, about what you think this genre could be. I invite you to have a conversation about the following questions. What does Assyrian art music or classical music mean to you? How does it differ from other kinds of Assyrian music? And what would you like to see or hear in Assyrian art music? For example, this could be things like instruments or sounds you'd like to hear. I plan to learn from your responses as I continue working on new performances of our music and continue to search for what the future of this genre could be. And if you are not Assyrian, I thank you for watching this lecture recital and for taking the time to learn about my community and our culture. To everybody, Basi Maraba.
Sharshi